nonetheless, there is a private kind of back of house space for each one of these units. And that, we think does have some advantages, and we think developers are seeing that too. It's a lot more efficient from a site planning standpoint for a lot of developers too. They're spending less time or less of the site plan dedicated to circulation. So this is starting to become a very attractive scenario for developers. And we think this actually could work pretty nicely. The photograph on the bottom here, not that bad of a space, but we think there are two kind of key aspects that ought to be added to the design standards to make this a more attractive living situation for residents. We're going to walk out of their front door into this concrete driveway. Number one is we think there ought to be some degree of kind of different non-concrete paving. So imagine if instead of this all being concrete, there was cobblestone, a strip of cobblestone running down the center of that driveway space. And maybe all the water would sort of drain to that cobblestone space, just make it less asphalt or less concrete, enhance the livability. It could be brick paving as well. So we've introduced a standard for decorative paving in here. We think that also when you drive from the residential drive into these spaces, you ought to drive up a little bit. You get a little bit of a hump. So as a motorist, you realize like, okay, I'm coming into a space where there might be kids on a tricycle. And then the other standard is providing some provision for landscaping. So the illustration on the bottom right is very good because they do have some degree of landscaping. It's not just the buildings coming down to concrete, there's landscaping on either side. So eventually over time, the space will feel a bit softer. One other thing we've added in here though is that we think there ought to be one shade tree for every 8 residents. So imagine if the tree in the back there that's behind that first garage, as that grows and gets pretty big, the canopy might overgrow that driveway space, shade it, and then you could start to think, this is actually not a bad place, and it could be an attractive place to live. The garage doors come up, your kids ride out on their tricycles, you meet your neighbors as you're coming and going. You've got your own private backyard space. So this is a scenario that we're seeing a lot of developers build, not just here, but in other communities. And we think with a few additional tweaks to their expectations, we could actually make pretty attractive little kind of neighborhood clusters. So that's the lane court. The residential lane is essentially the same typology, except that instead of being dead-ended, this one is a narrow drive that maybe kind of loops around and connects 2 different residential drives. So you could actually pass through a residential lane. But the design standards and expectations would all be the same for a residential lane typology. And there are examples in Murrieta that applications have come through that employ all these different kinds of circulation types. So we think we're on solid ground to say that developers are already thinking in this direction. Another big component that we've added into, as Dennis has alluded to, is we've included some architectural kind of design standards, not only for the single family and duplex types that would be populated onto these street types that I just showed you, but also for the ADU or accessory dwelling units. And what we've done in this case is we've really just illustrated a variety of different scenarios by which ADUs are going to be built in the city, generally as additions to existing single-family homes that already exist. Property owners want to build an ADU or kind of add on to their house in some fashion. And so there's a variety of different combinations by which we think are kind of typical. And so these are 4 of the ones that are illustrated here. I think the 2 at the top are kind of like the most normative. One is you just build a separate unit in your backyard, and that's your ADU. Another is same thing, but it's attached to your back of your garage or the back of your house in some fashion. There is also the possibility that you're converting some space or adding a second floor onto your house, and you're accessing the ADU through its own private stair. So in the lower left, you can see there's a little porch to the left of the garage. So on the kind of sidewalk that comes out to the street, that would be the entrance to the ADU. That is the way we imagine this. That is an internal stair that then goes up to a second floor unit built over the existing garage. One of the key things we've written into the design standards that we're providing here tonight is that any exterior stairs that access an ADU cannot be built within 10 feet of a property line, interior property line. We have found that in other communities, that's a big concern because these ADUs are often like pretty darn close to the property line, 4 or 5 feet. And if you have an exterior stair that leads to an exterior balcony, that's effectively overlooking the neighboring property's backyard, and that's a privacy concern. So we've addressed that by just saying, you're not allowed to build an exterior stair to an ADU if it's within 10 feet of a property line. And so if you want to build that exterior stair and have it overlook your own backyard, by all means, that's your decision. The illustration on the bottom right is one that I understand is actually a pretty common scenario in Murrieta, which is a lot of homes were built originally with 3-car garages. So you have a 2-car garage door and then a separate 1-car garage door, and that 1-car space is being converted into an ADU. It's going to be relatively small in a 300 square foot territory. So for the sake of the document, we called it junior ADUs, but that's a scenario that's emerging as well. So we have all these different scenarios kind of illustrated to give staff some degree of guidance as they're talking to applicants. Other than the standard related to the exterior stairs, and also a provision that when you're kind of touching the existing building, you need to match the style and kind of architectural characteristics of the original home. We really don't say much about design standards otherwise for ADUs. And the main reason for that is that state law kind of covers everything that we're allowed to say. So we do have in the document, we kind of list out all the applicable state laws that govern the various configurations of ADUs. So again, gives staff and applicants some degree of guidance to understand where they're supposed to look to figure out what the expectations are for accessory dwelling units when homeowners want to add one of these to their existing property. Another major kind of amendment that we're proposing to the design standards is a kind of overhaul of the way we expressed architectural styles. The original document we produced in 2003 had a menu of architectural styles that were applicable across the city, varied a little bit depending on which district and kind of neighborhood or kind of zoning district you were within the city. But they were all sort of structured in the same way where we had pages upon pages of different design standards. And what we found working with different communities is that this kind of exhaustive list gets a little bit challenging for applicants. And it also doesn't scale down to the single family development typology. The pages and pages of styles or standards for each style was written with the expectation we're going to see the larger multifamily development of 50 plus units. And it just doesn't scale down. So we're proposing a kind of reformatting of the standards with this amendment. So as a broad overview, each style has a page like this that has this kind of diagrammatic image and photograph and a description of what the style is. These have not changed. We have the same styles and the same description in the amendment. What has changed is the way we express the specific standards that an applicant would need to meet. And so we're using Spanish colonial revival as the example here. But what we have done in all the styles is now we have an inventory of, effectively 6 standards that must be met for any building, any scale that wants to call itself Spanish colonial revival or craftsman or American mercantile or the other styles that are allowed. These specific standards, if you look through them carefully, you will see that starting off, it regulates roofs. What is the expectations for roofs? Because all buildings have to have a roof. So we can regulate what we should have for roofs. And so in the case of Spanish colonial revival, we're saying you have to have a low-pitched red clay tile roof or concrete roof. Because I think everybody can agree if you don't have that kind of a roof, it's probably not Spanish colonial revival. You have to have a minimum of overhangs associated with the roof. Then we talk about what is the material of the facade of the elevation. All buildings have to have an exterior facade. So what is that going to be in this particular style? In the case of Spanish revival, it's going to be an off-white or white stucco finish. Then we deal with windows and doors, and then also other kind of core decorative features. So every one of the styles, we talk about roofs, walls, doors, and windows, the things that all buildings are required. We are very specific about the regulations for those kinds of things. Every building of that particular style must meet this minimum list. Then we have a list that goes on for 2 pages of additional decorative details that each style might consider employing. And this is a menu of options, and it scales up based on the size of the development or the individual building. So if it's a single family project, a single family detached dwelling, it only has to meet the minimum standards. But once it becomes a 10-unit building or an 11-unit building or development that has multiple buildings across the site, it has to start adding on more of these decorative features. So it's a menu of a kind of high degree of choice, but one that scales up appropriately as the development scales or the building itself scales. And so we have found, as we've kind of worked through this whole question of regulating architectural styles in an objective fashion, that we think that this is a much more efficient way by which applicants, developers, and city staff can kind of navigate the kind of questions of how they're applying architectural style. And like I said, still provides a high degree of individual choice amongst architects as they sort of deploy their aesthetic predilections and kind of standard building techniques. So as you can see, they're all sort of quite a long list. And I will note, we kind of took pains to make sure each of the styles is all equal. So you are not gonna, we're trying to be careful that we're not kind of creating an incentive by which all applicants are gonna kind of gravitate to one style because they're gonna say, oh, that one's much easier to meet because there's only 3 things and the other styles have 5. They should all be pretty equal. So it's really more a choice of how the development's gonna be marketed and which one of the styles is appropriate in which part of the city. So to speak about where styles align in the city, I'll turn the presentation back over to Dennis.
Yes, thank you. So as shown on the screen here, this is table 1.1 in the ODS, and the red essentially shows the changes. So the architectural styles essentially stay the same for most of it, a couple notable. So with the new zones, the single family zones, which are located essentially near the top of the table, you have the Mission Spanish Colonial Revival, you have the Craftsman, the Tuscan, and the Farmhouse, and that's for the for both the single family and then your single family, your estate residential and rural residential. I do want to note that we are also proposing the changes for the MF3 and MF4 to add the modern in. And then you can see under building types, we've added accessory dwelling units to all the residential zones where ADUs are allowed. Another set of amendments was essentially to, due to the development community feedback as they were proposing projects, they've expressed some challenges. One of them specifically here is there was a distance separation requirement between structures on the same lot. So if it's a single-story structure, it would be a 10-foot distance separation. If it's a 2-story structure, you'd have a 15-foot. And then if it was a 3-story structure, you'd have a 20-foot separation between. They've expressed that there's challenges meeting the density based on these distance separation requirements. So we're looking to change the standard to 5 feet. And essentially there may be building and fire code requirements that could cause them to extend that separation. But as far as the ODS applies, the minimum standard would be 5 feet. And then the second one is the parking lot finger planter. Right now it's set at 9 feet. We're changing that down to 5 feet, and that's an interior dimension. And you can see on the bottom, for that one, you can see the bottom image. It's kind of you have parking spaces, and then essentially maybe a break after 4 or 5 or 10 parking spaces, you have a finger planter. Usually those finger planters are at the end of a parking aisle or drive aisle, so that's where those would apply. And then real quick, on the funding and schedule, so as mentioned before, so the funding is through Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG, and that was through a REAP grant. So this allowed the city to hire a consulting firm, in this PlaceWorks, and that's to assist in the updating the ODS document, and that's at no cost to the city. So with all grants, comes with some caveats. Here, the funding ends July 1. So what we're trying to do is just propose this amendment here. We're going to go to propose to go to City Council on June 2nd, hopefully with the second reading on June 16th. And why are we proposing these modifications? So in summary, it's in compliance with state law, which includes facilitating housing development and creating objective standards. Staff has received feedback from the development community on some areas where they've raised concerns and challenges meeting the standard. So we've tried to address some of those. And then third, here, staff has received internal feedback from staff on some areas that needed some cleaning up. And then last, creating some certainty for the development community and a minimum standard for staff, which helps speeds up the development review process. With that, in closing, staff recommends the Planning Commission receive the staff presentation, adopt the resolution recommending to the City Council approval of the amendments as noted in the staff report, with the addition of removing Chapter 5 from the ODS. And staff is available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Watts, for your presentation. At this point in time, I'll open it up to comments from the dais here. Go to Commissioner Wojcik first, because I believe it was 3 years ago when we had a project that looked somewhat like a, as you termed, a prison. And,
Yes.
And so this kind of brought us to this point to make things look a little bit nicer. So here we are.
No more housing developments that look like prisons, right?
Yep.
Okay. Just a couple questions real quick. The design standard style, does the city have any discretion to implement one of the styles in a particular area because there's too much of that style already there in the surrounding areas? Can it dictate, hey, we need you to do this style instead of these other approved styles?
It would just be what's available. So no, we wouldn't be able to say there's too much of this.
Okay. And then on this distance separation, it went from 10 to 20 feet depending, now it's down to 5. Is there any room to kind of cut the middle ground and just keep everything maybe at 10?
If that's something that you feel is important, I think some of that through the review is, what's happening with this space in between? Is it become a walkway? Is it landscape? And I think what the development community was kind of expressing is there's a lot of kind of dead area that's being provided out of that. So it's making it difficult for the density. But it can be something that could be adjusted.
I know in some cases we're doing it to meet density standards, but in those situations where we don't need to meet that standard for that particular project, if we can maybe expand it a little bit. My first house I lived in was pretty close to my neighbor, and I could hear their toilet flush all the time. I mean, it was that close, so. Anyway, I don't have any further questions.
Commissioner Rose.
I had a couple questions. If you could go back to chart or page 11. So on this picture, the bottom right, do the people who live in that unit own that property, own the land?
I would say in this image, it's most likely that they might. But the way we've written the standards, we're not sort of saying that the land has to be owned outright or not. So
Okay, so we're silent on.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What about HOAs and requirements that HOAs may have to maintain that property? And
I would say that would be dependent on the individual HOAs. I think the scenarios that I have seen across the region would suggest that these residential drives are private streets. So the entirety of them, the asphalted curbs, the lighting, everything would be maintained by the HOA.
okay. And what about the height limits? I thought I saw in one of the slides, 4 stories were the limit?
Yeah, there's a couple of restrictions on height. One is what you have in your baseline zoning. So the different districts have a height limit
Right.
established by the zoning, and we're obviously not touching that.
It's written right here.
But for some of the architectural styles, we do have a height limit. So certain styles really don't make sense after 3 stories, like the farmhouse style. Imagine a 4 or 5 story
Farmhouse.
farmhouse is going to
Yeah.
look pretty ridiculous. Craftsman architecture also starts to look a little bit stretched when it gets beyond 3 stories. So with Craftsman, we do allow it to go up to 4 stories, but only a portion. A fragment can be 4 stories. I think the new development on Adams is a really excellent example of that kind of balancing it. And that whole list, this kind of inventory of kind of the maximum height per style was something that we had worked through when we did the original ODS document 3 years ago. So some of the styles are essentially unlimited in height, like, you know, a modern building, you know,
Right.
picture any tall building in a modern style, but yeah, Craftsman, farmhouse tend to want to be more in the 3-story territory.
When I read through this, it seemed to me that we were focused on style, but not like the quality of the materials.
Well, I would say when we kind of thought through the way the styles standards were written, there is some quite a bit of expectation about materiality and kind of the quality of materials expressed through the styles and the way those are written. So like, for example, on Spanish Revival, we're very specific about it being either a red clay tile or a kind of concrete tile roof material.
Okay.
So on those minimum things, we do get pretty specific on the quality of materials. But, you know, also, not being hyper specific, we don't want to specify individual products, obviously. But, you know, so we're trying to be specific while also making sure that we're open to new changes and material technologies. I think last time we did this was in the kind of height of the pandemic, and people were finding it very challenging to get certain kind of materials because of kind of supply chain constraints. So there's all sorts of factors that we kind of have to think about.
I had one final question. I asked this last meeting. The HOA requirements are superseded by all of this. So if an HOA had some kind of requirement about an ADU or something, all those requirements that an HOA would have don't hold up.
I think I'll defer to city staff on your kind of application of HOAs versus city standards.
Yeah, can you clarify the question?
Sure. So if I live in a community that has an HOA and it has requirements not to build ADUs, you can't, it's like, too bad.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I mean, through the state, it has mentioned that ADUs are, but I know there's a recent court case, whether it's been taken fully to, you know, the final judgment and so on, but there was a court case recently where a HOA did stop an ADU that was taken to court, and the courts essentially sided with them. But as far as designs and so on, yes, the city's standards would apply first. So if the HOA had something different, that could be something that they have, but ultimately the city standards would apply first.
First. Okay, thank you.
Just as a follow-up, Mr. Early, do you have any idea where that lawsuit is right now? I know it's kind of, I think when this came up in our workshop, if I recall, that somebody's successful, at least for the time being, an HOA is successful, but it's still not fully litigated.
Yeah, I don't know this particular lawsuit status, but there are a number of pending bills that are expanding most of the laws related to housing that have been affecting cities, specifically to HOAs, both in the housing and in the landscaping and in the water and all of these things that have previously been applying to cities. They're starting to expand to HOAs. But generally speaking, you know, the supremacy rules will always apply, you know, the federal government, then the state governments, then ours, then the HOAs. So nobody lower on that chain can do something that's prohibited by somebody higher on that chain. So as was mentioned, the HOAs can't add an additional design style, allow somebody to redesign their house in a way that's inconsistent with what our standards are. But to the extent that there's a HOA wants to prohibit something that we allow, as long as the state doesn't prohibit them from prohibiting it, which then they can do so. But as I said, that's rapidly changing. Every year the HOAs are getting pinned down with more and more of these restrictions.
So, to be determined for the most part, but.
I think it's going to be
the end
very
res-
difficult for an HOA to prohibit an otherwise lawful ADU in the future.
Right. The only thing a couple things here, I'd comment, I recall from the workshop there, in each of the areas or zones, correct me if I'm wrong, but for example, where this came up is the downtown historic area. Builders are basically given a choice of like, let's say, 4 different type of architectural styles. So they can pick one. Well, they may say, well, hey, we like the Craftsman, it works, and there's, whether or not there's plenty of different of the same design standards there, they can still pick it as long as it fits within those ones that are the options for either the type of project it is or the type of zone it's in.
That is correct.
Okay. So that kind of answers that. Just to clarify, when you say removing Chapter 5, what is Chapter 5?
Yes, good question. So Chapter 5, it's essentially, it's a checklist of all the standards in chapters 1 through 4. And really, it's a checklist for staff to be able to go through. When we receive a project to review, we go through the checklist and we start on page 1 of the checklist and, look at the first standard that it states. And we just see, does the project meet that? And it's a yes or a no. What page is it on? So it's a checklist. It's not standards by itself. It's just a checklist of the standards.
I'm just looking in the staff report, what pages that all is contained.
Yeah, and we just realized that we adopted it when we adopted the standards, and we'd like to have the flexibility to be able to update the checklist whenever we would like to. So
As opposed to coming back
every time,
every time
just to
as
update
a
the checklist, right?
Okay,
So it starts on page 206.
okay, 206, okay.
And I'll note, Chair, while you find that reference, that's what we're finding in other communities. They're adopting the standards, or they're adopting it through an ordinance, and then they're generally giving, as part of the adoption, staff the authority to produce whatever kind of user manuals and checklists that might facilitate development, without necessarily coming back to amending the ordinance.
Okay, got it, found it. And then also, you mentioned the garage conversion, so you gave the 4 different, the 4 different type of ADUs, one of them being a garage conversion, and you brought up the one on the junior ADU down at the bottom there, that's, converting a third car into an ADU. Is there a restriction to say, hey, well, I want to convert the 2 car, not the 1 car, or take all 3 into an ADU?
You could do convert the 2. I mean, the main part will be is you need to still provide parking spaces. So, it just depends on the driveway and can you get the parking space for that? So you could have out of the 3 car, it could be the 2 car essentially and convert that.
And
So, yes.
basically, we're subject to state law, so we don't really have the ability to dictate who can have which ADUs. State law says that they can have essentially all of these on one lot. You can have 4 with a primary residence. You can have 4 units on your lot. You can have an attached ADU, a detached, like it shows here, and then one that's like a junior ADU or the garage conversion.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is worst case scenario here is, here's maybe best case scenario, right? Here's what you're showing is a single car garage ADU. But the worst case is that somebody could basically essentially eliminate all the garage space, could they not?
Correct.
Yeah, that's my point. And so they could make it where there is no garage parking, and if each of the neighbors did that, then obviously there'd be problematic either driveway parking or more street parking because it would push everybody out of the garage and into the streets.
Yeah, we just have that requirement that there's the parking that's eliminated, that's on the driveway.
Which brings me to my last thing, which is I also wanted to ask about the distance separation. So it was between 10 and 20 feet, and so the proposal to take it all the way down to 5 feet, which creates more density and eventually more conversions and whatnot, and makes things a little bit more crowded. So if there's flexibility in that 5 feet, give me the upside of bringing it to 5 feet. What's the benefit to the city?
Well, again, these are, this requirement is based on structures on the same lot. So you have these, what these multifamily zones, where they're trying to get the single story, or keep saying single story, so the single family structure, a single unit structure next to a duplex or 2-unit structure. With that requirement, it just made them do the 10-foot separation. So the upside here in reducing it is it does allow them to get the units a little bit closer to each other. It does allow them to get to the density a little bit easier, and maybe even make other areas like your common open space and your kind of amenity areas more clustered, where it may be a bigger area that's more usable. Right now, they might be using it all up and try to create this distance separation requirement.
And I would add, Chair, it doesn't increase the density. So the density is what the density is. It's the
Correct.
density of the zone. This provides more flexibility for the development community. We've had a number of projects trying to utilize the existing ODS and struggling to make a project work in specific zones, namely our multifamily 2 zone, which we rezoned a large swath of the city in the general plan update in 2020. We've had a number of developers struggle to try to make their proposed projects work. And as Alan kind of went through these different typologies, this is what we're seeing. So I would say we really need to have that 5-foot separation between less dense developments. And I would say with single family and duplex style developments, I could see keeping a larger standard for buildings that have 3 or more units, say, that you need a 10-foot setback maybe between those buildings. But the 5-foot, we really need it between on those projects. We went over an example in the workshop. I know not everybody was here last month, but there was a developer who proposed a project where it's basically duplexes and single units, but it's in the multifamily zone. And when someone proposes something like that, we really do need that 5-foot to make it work. Otherwise, they can't make it comply with the objective standards. And the liability to the city is if that's the only project they can build because of insurance and fire code and all the other things that Alan was kind of alluding to, we get into a pickle there, right? Because we're creating standards that then they can't build a project in. So we're trying to provide a little more flexibility there and in a way to make it so we don't get sued on a project as well, I would say.
So what you're saying is that you need the 5-foot on some, but not all. But the way that it's written would just make it 5 for everything. So it would seem to me, just off the top of my head, is that it probably needs to be dialed down a little bit more specifically for some of the projects that you're talking about, as opposed to making 5 feet for everything, as opposed to 5 feet for just the some projects that you need.
Yeah,
Just my gut feeling.
I think that's fair. We could, like I said, we could look at maybe having the 5-foot between single family and duplex style structures and write it to say structures with 3 or more units need to be 10 feet away from each other. Something like that would work.
Question. A developer wants to put in a single-family housing project. Under the current rules, the distance separation can be 10 to 20 feet, correct? Or
It could be more. It depends on the zone. What we're really kind of getting at is, as Dennis was talking about in the presentation, is when a developer's proposing more of like a condo style development where the buildings are all really close together. In a traditional single family neighborhood, there's much larger setbacks, and those are currently in the code. So a traditional single family neighborhood, like most of us probably live in, or we own a home, there are larger setbacks. There's a 20-foot front, there might be a 10-foot side, so the buildings might be 20 feet apart, right? And that's just built into the base zone and with standard single-family development in the city, and that's a lot of the way the city's developed. What we're seeing is a product type we've never seen before, and people are building these units, basically they're condo units, where people really only own their airspace. So we're trying to come up with a way to make those buildings work, but then understand that they're going to be much closer together than a traditional single-family neighborhood.
okay. Thanks for the clarification, because I thought I was also applying to these larger single-family projects as
No,
well.
I would
Yeah.
say, like, if developers coming in to build a subdivision and they're just gonna do a typical single-family lot subdivision, they're basically only gonna use the architectural styles in here, and they're gonna use basically the base zone and build whatever it is, 7,000 square foot lots, 6,000 square foot lots, 10-foot side yards, 20-foot front yards, the traditional neighborhoods. And that's what we'll see, and this won't make it so they can build something different.
Okay. I do like, though, the conversation about giving us some flexibility, using the 5 foot in certain circumstances and the 10 feet in others. So,
Okay, now we'll take public testimony. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments, starting with proponents, then opponents, and then those that are neutral?
Yes, we have Casson Klein.
Okay, and just for the record, we're starting the public hearing at 6:57.
Could you put up the slide that has the architecture types? I think it's slide 21. And could you blow up the rural residential, please? This one? Yeah, please. I can't zoom in. Sorry.
And I can't squint anymore.
Good evening. Just some housekeeping. If all of you could please speak up and/or speak into your microphones, it's very difficult for us to hear you all back there. I'm concerned with custom homes, rural residential, state residential, 1 acre lots and 2.5 acre lots that seem to be, if I understand this correctly, getting lumped in with all of the other, with multifamily and the other smaller lot, single family. As you know, someone who grew up with parents building multiple custom homes on large lots, you know, my parents liked having the ability to choose their style. And so I think we definitely need to go back and consider adopting additional architectural styles with that. And I have some questions that came up with some of these. Is Mission Revival the same as Spanish Revival or Spanish Colonial? Is Pueblo Revival and Mediterranean? Those all seem to be Spanish themes to me. Are those all this, does that all get lumped in? Or if someone wants to come in and build one of those types on a single family rural residential, are they precluded from doing that? Is a ranch style the same as modern farmhouse? I would hate to think that one of our founding fathers, Tex McAllister, would not be able to build his ranch style house, which is down at the corner of Hayes and Guava. A couple others, barn dominiums are very popular right now, and those are multi-million-dollar homes on large lots. French country, cottage, industrial, contemporary, mid-century modern, Victorian. Those are all questions that I have that I think that maybe we've missed the mark on. And no criticism of staff. It's very easy for all of us to get wrapped up in the state mandates, multifamily, and those things. That's really what we're trying to address. But I would hate to see us ice out somebody, and we still have a lot of rural residential land and opportunities for custom homes. And, you know, typically the people in that socioeconomic level don't like being dictated and put in a box. So I'm hopeful that we can revisit that given the deadline that we're up against. And maybe that's something that we can do and then revisit so that we don't lose that funding. But it's something that we definitely, if nothing else, need to make a recommendation, in my opinion, back to City Council to consider. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Any additional speakers?
Next, we have Dan Long. Alan Long.
Good evening, Mr. Long.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Just want to commend you all up there as I'm listening to this presentation and I'm thinking of my questions. I'm like, oh, what about this? all of you actually echoed what I was thinking, so it's a pleasure to be represented by you, and thank you for your concern and those questions. I want to commend staff as well, putting this together. One thing I do want to point out, there's a little bit of a disconnect. I'm somewhat in tune with the community. I've heard you speak and voice your concerns. I've heard council speak and voice their concerns about high density. And we're proposing tonight to make it less restrictive on a setback so that we can accommodate higher density. That's your choice. That's not anybody making you do that. That's a choice. It's not the state coming down, and there might be some repercussions if you don't meet your numbers, but that's your choice. Last meeting, you heard in a workshop to possibly consider in the future a type of residence that doesn't even exist today because a property owner who wants to build apartments can't afford the insurance or doesn't want to pay for the insurance. I'm going to bring that full circle to what Casson said. You're putting the rural residential residents in a box here, and I have seen very, very little to accommodate them. We pay those high fire rates. We're trying to figure things out, but yet you make it more and more restrictive, especially the next item you're going to hear about is going to be more restrictive. So maybe some development standards and architectural guidelines that deal specifically with the rural residential areas, and maybe some effort and input in how we could be accommodated to build, because you assume, even in the slide, you assume a flat, square, or rectangular lot. When you talk about setbacks and all these things, most rural residential areas are not square, rectangular lots, nor are they flat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Any other speakers?
Seeing none?
Okay. All right. Then we'll go ahead and close the public hearing at 7:03. Okay. Staff, you heard the speakers.
Yes, so I guess responding to Mr. Long as far as the, maybe the potential disconnect of the multifamily, yeah, I could see how, it could be read that way, and I think it's more of a, they've expressed a challenge that they can't meet the density that's allowed by that zone with their product type. So we are trying to create more flexibility, and that is kind of in a result of just trying to eliminate the potential situation of being sued by the state saying you've created standards that are making it difficult to build in that zone.
Mr. Chairman, can I get just to add some more color to that comment? As we've been working with the developers who are working in the zones that where this would apply, what they're trying to do is facilitate detached, or not detached, but attached 2-unit projects where they can get fire insurance. And so what it's actually doing is that this will help lower, at least under the current circumstances, would lower the number of units that developers are actually not wanting to build, if that makes sense. So they know they can't get insurance for the higher density, 6-pack, 9-pack, attached unit buildings. And so what the feedback that was mentioned earlier is that this reduced setback helps them deliver a product that is more aligned with home ownership as opposed to a rental project. So that's something to consider. It's a tough call to make, but at least what we're seeing in the market right now is that reduced setback helps a home ownership product versus a rental product.
Okay, that was one of the concerns. What about the, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure I understand. It's one thing to say we need to shrink the distance to comply with the law, and it's another to say we need to shrink the distance to comply with what developers want. And I'm trying to differentiate between the two. When is it that we have to shrink it to comply with law versus a request from a developer? Because that's what I like the resolution to say we will comply with California law and shrink the distance accordingly. But if they're just going to unilaterally say, we want you to shrink the distance, but it's not to comply with anything, then I just say, no, you're not going to get that. I guess that's what I'm trying to get the best of both worlds here.
If I could help a little bit too, what we're seeing on that is we're seeing developers propose more density bonus projects where they're trying to get around our regulations, so which is more affordable housing. And that's, we've seen a trend where a number of developers have come in recently where they're like, well, since we can't meet your standards, we're just going to do a density bonus project, which is really odd. That's really the only reason why they're proposing to do it. So, and as our director Chantarangsu alluded to, these are projects where they're trying to build for sale product types, and the code was really designed for, at least the way we adopted the ODS was really more on the rental side. So we're actually getting for sale projects, but then they're like, we can't meet your standards, so we're going to do affordable housing, which is strange, but that's what we're seeing. So we're trying to find a way to allow them to build basically what they're asking to do and get for sale product types in some of those areas, which is what we're hearing folks want to see. It's in the multifamily zones instead of apartment buildings. In some cases, these folks can't build. They essentially can't build these for sale product types if we don't provide a little more flexibility. The only thing we're going to see there is rental apartment buildings.
Yeah, and just to add, I guess is the way the standard is currently drafted, what it does incentivize is you build a bigger building with more units attached. That way you don't have so much separation requirements between buildings. So in turn, what they're trying to do is offer this smaller product, which is your single family structure next to a duplex structure or something like that. But as you create more structures, you have more distance separation requirements out of it.
We did bring this up at the DAG. I want to say it came up last year at the DAG meeting, and then again this spring. There have been members of the DAG who've said we should provide more flexibility in the ODS. So something we've been hearing from the development community on the regular.
So one other comment, you probably may not find this a surprise, but state law almost, at least in this case right now, is not intersecting with what the market wants to build.
If someone's trying to meet density, but we want to keep distance, can we just tell them they got to go higher? Throw another story on to meet their density requirement? Is that an alternative?
You could, yeah. I mean, they can go and do the bigger product, which is your 6 units, 8 units, or a 40-unit building. But that's where I think they're saying they're having trouble with the fire insurance. So they're trying to do the smaller building size, which has less units in it. That way it's more marketable as far as from the fire insurance side. And then in turn, you have your distance separation issue, which, the more structures, even though it's a single unit or a 2-unit, you have to have that separation. You'd have that same separation if it was a 40-unit building.
Because these are my words, not staff's words, but hearing that if they don't get their density based on the current distance, then they're extorting the city by saying we're going to go for our density bonus. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, if you want to do that, great, but we'll just make you build up and not out.
They might be able to get around that with the density bonus law as well, Commissioner. Unfortunately, the density bonus law kind of is like a get out of jail free card. So as soon as they play that card, they start wavering and exempting and incentivizing out of standards, which can be problematic if we're trying to get a certain product type. So it's good to see it kind of from both sides. I understand what some of the speakers are saying, but you also have to think about it like the way the developers are playing the game. So
I think I heard you say in this was, by cutting the distance down to 5 feet, that one of the things that they would do is maybe give up some common area space or some greenbelt space or some other type of common space in the development that was maybe larger. That would shrink in order to accommodate this. So there still is wiggle room for them to basically build the project at, take, for example, between a 5 and 10-foot space, they would just maybe lose a little bit more, like a tot lot, or it wouldn't be quite as big, or something else within the project. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, I was just saying, just kind of surmising of when you look at a site plan, if you have to meet certain requirements, your setbacks, your density, there's open space requirements, and making amenities. So when you start having a 10-foot separation, you might have a walkway and landscaping, and that might be able to qualify as your common open space area. Well, what is that really getting you? But if you could shrink that down and it still meets, the purpose of the site plan, that extra area potentially could go toward maybe a larger amenity area, a larger common open space area. It lets them kind of cluster the structures together a little bit more. Sometimes it does come at a negative aspect of, putting buildings too close and windows and so on. But it does create a potential. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it does create a potential where you could have a more usable common open space, amenity area, those type of elements.
Okay, so any other questions on the distance separation? Okay, so could you address the design standards on the custom homes in rural residential? I know we gave a selection. It looked like when we had it up on the screen, there was 4 different options there. And there were some questions about what do each of those design standards mean in those areas. And then I guess out of all the design standards that we have, what ones, conversely, what aren't allowed in rural residential?
So what's not allowed is probably, a lot of those that Mr. Klein had mentioned as far as the Victorian, colonial. So you just have essentially 4 that are there, which is that Mission, Spanish colonial revival, your Craftsman, your Tuscan, and farmhouse. So the 2 speakers did bring up a good point about, there is that potential that you do remove the ability to have some of those on the larger lots. So, it could be commissions purview to maybe whether you take out on the rural residential or the larger lots. So maybe it's the rural residential or the estate residential 1. I think the only concern staff might have is just with the number of housing bills that are changing each year. Is there something that starts happening where now there's some type of housing that gets allowed through the rural residential or something like that? So we just wanted to cover ourselves in case something like that happened. So we could take this out. We could push some of the I guess to address the architectural aspect, you'd have to look at either exempting out those zones or maybe having an application, like a development plan application, if you're going to do something other than the architectural designs that are listed in the ODS.
So Chairman, I would caution the commission on going too far, because the thing is, we don't want to have lots that don't have standards that apply to them. So what I would pitch, I think something we could entertain and we could make the change when we go to council would be 1 home on 1 lot in the RR and estate residential 1 could be exempt from the architectural requirement, but any other, obviously any other existing requirements still apply. But I would caution it, taking an entire zone out of the standards is not a good idea, in part because of what Dennis was alluding to. If the state passes a law that allows some kind of residential development in our residential zones, we want to have standards that apply. We don't want to be in a situation where, as Commissioner Wojciech has talked about many times, we get an undesirable architectural design somewhere on the west side that we don't want to see, right? So, but to the speaker's points, I totally understand what the speakers are getting at, and that makes sense. I think what we could recommend is for 1 house on 1 lot in RR and estate residential, architectural style is not a requirement. And so they could pick the style that they want to do. We can review that. That gives those homeowners, those property owners with those larger lots, flexibility that they're looking for. I think that makes sense. I wouldn't take them out of the zones. I think that's that's creating some kind of strange loophole where you're going to get somebody out there that's going to come in and propose something on multiple lots that's going to be a problem. And we want to head that off. So this way, if someone's coming in and they're doing a subdivision, yeah, they've got to do some kind of architectural style. And they're probably going to be doing a development plan with the subdivision anyway. So we're probably covered there. So it's really it would help mom and pop, and the developer's still going to have to do some kind of architecture. Right?
Yeah, it's the mom and pop, the single residence on a piece of property, and they want to put something that seemingly would fit. But I know we're running up against the clock here, so is that something that by putting what you just described as an amendment in there could happen before this takes to council on June 2nd?
We could add that in. If you remember the last time, we added some notes there in that notes column. I think as staff, we could add that in and cover that aspect, which would provide that flexibility for those mom and pops on the one-off one lots.
Okay, which brings us back to the distance. I'll be honest with you, I'm not super convinced on the 5 feet. It bothers me.
No, I agree. I'll just say what I said before. I just want to make sure that the density we impose complies with the law, but if we can impose 10 to 20 feet, then we still do. I don't know how you write that in a resolution.
Well, I wouldn't want it to go less than 10, to be honest with you.
So if it's helpful to avoid the whole question of law versus, density here, the issue isn't so much that the state is saying you have to provide X number or so many feet or anything like that. The fundamental issue for us as local cities is the requirements that we can't impose a standard that would render a project unfeasible, which is a loaded word with no clear definition, but which every housing developer will throw at you. And HCD has taken a very, very favorable approach to the developers when it comes to defining what is unfeasible. Basically, you heard the complaints about fire insurance rates, and as soon as they start saying that our requirement makes the project unfeasible, it makes it too expensive, we can't build what was trying to build, that's when HCD comes after us as cities. And we've seen it happen here in Murrieta, and we've seen it happen in our other jurisdictions as well. So that's kind of part of what we're trying to protect against is a requirement that makes these projects not pencil out. And while that doesn't seem right, that they could, how they use it, that's the tool that they're using.
How about if we have it that it's 10 feet unless it makes the project unfeasible? And then the minimum would be 5 feet. And then let them fight the fight with staff, what makes it unfeasible.
I'd say I wouldn't recommend doing that because we do have ministerial reviews. So we don't really have subjectivity. That's a big part of why we're doing objective standards. It needs to be clear. It shouldn't be nebulous. So I don't think that's a good approach for the objective standards.
Then my approach would be, if we want to make it objective, let's just say 10 feet.
Rather than 5.
Yeah. You'd be all right with 10 feet?
I just want to clarify. Is it the lot line that's the 5 feet?
There's no lot line on this example. These are all,
Okay.
to my understanding, these are all for projects that are all built on a single lot. So we're talking about your traditional apartment complex, but instead of apartment buildings, you've got, single family and duplexes all scattered around on a single lot, large lot, but yes.
So it would be the wall of one duplex next to
5 feet
another 5 feet.
from the
5
next
feet
building.
is from,
Yeah, me to you.
yeah,
It's an alternative project designed to the traditional apartment buildings.
right. So it's from unit to unit.
Correct, but smaller units,
Right.
single and duplex units, not multi-story
So
units.
staff put the example slide up. So in these examples, we have developers currently struggling with trying to make it work with the current standards that have it at 10 feet, and they're looking to get the units closer together. But these are basically airspace units. There's not a property line there. They're just trying to get the units as close together as they can. in order to meet our required density. And all of these projects that we've seen, they're struggling just to meet the minimum density. They're not trying to do more units. They're trying to do the bottom of the zone and just get to the bottom number. And they're struggling to do it. And they're trying to build a nice product type too, I would say. They're not trying to build units that people don't want to buy. They're trying to build for sale units that meet the market demand that Alan was talking about. And those are of a certain size with typically like a 2-car garage. And it gets tough to make it work with our current standards.
Your traditional multi-lot development that most of the city is currently built on, that kind of development would still have the same standards, same setbacks. If it's 10 feet side backs, you're a minimum 20 feet apart, so.
Yeah,
That doesn't change.
oh, go ahead, sorry. I was just saying that doesn't change. Yeah. On the exhibit there, so like the top left, you could see there's a space between I guess on the top of the drive, on the left-hand side, you have 2 units. And so these are 2 stories, so the setback right now would be 15 feet since they're 2 stories. So that's what we're kind of considering here. A lot of the ones that they're building, you know, you have a garage, essentially a garage and an entry on your bottom floor. And then essentially you go to the second floor, it's your kitchen, your living area, and then your third floor is bedrooms and so on. So you have situations where it's a 3-story. So now that would change to 15 feet, essentially, and that's what the current standard is for some of these. You know, it's a single unit, but it could be 3 stories high. So now the setback is 20 feet on those situations.
At the last meeting, there was a picture of a unit, a single-family unit next to a duplex. Well, the duplex has 0, right? They butt right together, and we're allowing that.
Correct, because they're airspace units, so they could build like a triplex, they could build a quadplex, they could build a duplex, and right, they're just airspace between there's just a wall. And in this case, we're talking about then the distance separation between those 2 buildings. And in the example we showed at the workshop, there's a developer looking to build essentially like a single-family unit and then a duplex, then a single-family unit and then a duplex. And right now, the standard is they have to have 10 feet between each one. It's making it exceedingly difficult for them to build that product type, and they're looking to reduce it. We've heard this from numerous developers, and like I said, it's come up at the Development Advisory Group. It's something that we've heard from folks, so it's something that we think does make sense when you look at these product types. We're not going to see this all over the city. We're really going to see this only in the multifamily areas. So it's kind of like, as I alluded to earlier, do we want to see apartment buildings or do we want to see for sale units? If we want to see these for sale unit types, these are the flexibility and the standards they need to build these product types.
But I'm just thinking out loud, they could have 2 duplexes together and then have space on each side. So you'd have 4 units with no space.
Well, I guess that would be a fourplex.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so
You can build a fourplex, but then they have to be 10 feet from the next fourplex in the current standards.
Commissioner, I think the distinction, it's not distance separation between units, but it's more distance separation between structures.
structures, okay.
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
it could be a 2-unit structure, a 3-unit structure, or a single-unit structure.
If I may, it seems to me that I think Mr. Staley kind of alluded to a kind of idea that maybe like it's a sliding scale, that it's 5 feet for these sort of 2-story, single-family style structures, but it might increase to 10 feet if it gets to be a 3-story building, and then once it's into a 4-story building, maybe it goes back to the 15 feet as originally written. So we're not opening the doors so that somebody wants to build a kind of complex that looks like one of these illustrations, but they're a collection of 20-unit buildings and they only have the 5-foot separation. That's not the intent, obviously. So maybe we could kind of look at that sort of like having a sliding scale. And the other piece to note on this is that, building and fire codes still come into play. So there is going to be, by building and fire codes, a desire to have a certain separation between 2 walls if both of those walls have windows. So some of these units where they get really, really close to each other, only one of the units has windows and that kind of into that side yard because they can't by fire code put windows on the other one. And that's just a kind of like layout development choice that developers have to kind of figure out as they design the inside of these units. But I would think doing some sort of sliding
Not a
scale
single home.
as the buildings get taller makes a high degree of sense to me.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, looking for a motion. Mr. Wojcik.
I'll make a motion to adopt the recommendation by staff with the exceptions removing Chapter 5 from the ODS, setting the distance separation at 10 feet, and exempting rural residential and estate residential from the ODS for a single-family home. I think that covers it.
Just clarify, one home on one lot.
One home on one
When
lot.
someone's developing one home on one lot.
I will second that motion.
I can read the recommendation
Okay,
for the commission. The recommendation is that the planning commission receive the staff presentation, adopt a resolution recommending that the city council file a notice of exemption, finding the project is exempt from CEQA, and adopt an ordinance that includes the final revised residential objective design standards and code amendment related to the development code chapters 16.08 and 16.16 entitled An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Murrieta, California, amending Title 16 of the Murrieta Municipal Code to revise the city's development code, chapters 16.08 and 16.16, to amend the multifamily residential and mixed-use residential objective design standards. With the additional items, Vice Chair Wojcik voiced.
Thank you. Maybe this isn't plugged in well or something. Yeah.
Motion carries 3-0.
okay. Gives staff time to change out here, and we're going to move on to agenda item number 3. Our next one is the reintroduction of the Hillside Ordinance updates.
See if they need to reboot. Does staff need to reboot? Do you need a recess to reboot or anything?
Stand by for technical issues. Okay, we're good? Okay, we're going to move forward with the public hearing, second public hearing, reintroduction of the Hillside Ordinance updates, DCA 2021-2396 to amend the Murrieta Development Code. Are there any members of the Planning Commission that wishes to abstain or recuse themselves from this item? Nobody? Seeing none, we'll move on to staff presentation.
Yeah, tonight we have Chris Tracy, Senior Planner, and Deputy Director Jared Ramaya in the well.
Just holding on the PowerPoint.
The suspense is killing me.
All right, there we go. All right. Thank you, Carl, for the introduction. My name is Chris Tracy. I'm a senior planner here in our advanced planning division here at the city. Today, I'll be providing a presentation on our hillside updates with a recommended action. First of all, I'm going to provide some background on how we got here. The city council adopted the general plan back in 1994, following incorporation of the city in 1991. At that time, it was determined that all development would utilize Riverside County's ordinance number 348 until the city had its own development code. September 1997, the city began that process. In early 1998, the city implemented these new development code standards. Inclusive of these standards were parameters covering hillside development. Other than some minor updates in 2003, the hillside development standards have remained relatively unchanged since that time. It should be noted that since 2022, staff has worked to modernize the hillside development regulations. These were often viewed as being subjective and inconsistent.
Staff was tasked at one of the council workshops back in 2022 to work on this topic. So between 2022 and 2026, the council conducted a series of workshops to comprehensively review and update the hillside regulations and related sections of the municipal code. So if you remember, back on June 28th, 2023, I was here before the Planning Commission, and we had a public hearing on this item with the Development Code Amendment presented as it relates to hillside development. Today, I'll be just providing a comparison of what was presented in 2023 versus what is presented today. We're going to reintroduce these standards. So why are we proposing these modifications? We've had inconsistent standards applied throughout hillside areas of the city. We've had application errors over time. Per the city council's direction back in 2022, these regulations really should have applied to hillside areas, not on a citywide basis. We've had process delays with some applications that otherwise would align with the general plan. And as I mentioned, this has been a council directive at that 2022 goal-setting workshop. So the overall goal with these updates has been to provide a concise and accurate information for everyone that's involved with hillside development review. Some key modifications as provided in the ordinance. So first of all, we're establishing a formal GIS-based map, a hillside overlay map, and we're replacing the average slope calculation with a GIS analysis. As an alternative to that, a developer or applicant can provide a CAD-based solution if they choose so. We're also clarifying retaining wall standards specific to hillside areas only, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. We have some minor grading updates, landscaping updates, and building height standard updates. We also have enhanced hillside design guidelines and fire safety consistency. And the goal here is to improve project predictability and provide code clarity. So on your screen here, this is the 2023 version of the proposed hillside area overlay map. And I'm going to contrast that with what's here today. So based on workshop feedback, we did add in specific plans with a disclaimer for someone to reference that document if they have potential hillside development criteria in that specific plan. And these areas would be really areas like Greer Ranch and Copper Canyon on the west side. Those are kind of the primary ones, but some of the other ones do have some hillside criteria as well. So next to the workshop collaboration process, council directed staff to remove the prominent ridgelines maps. We determined that the ridgeline criteria can be evaluated without having a map in place, and we'll go forward as proposed there. The next set of criteria that's new is developed versus undeveloped criteria as it relates to hillside criteria. The workshop process identified a need to better define what developed and undeveloped properties were within hillside areas. The workshops identified a need to clarify which improvements may be exempt. Staff did collaborate with engineering staff and also building and safety staff to help develop this table, which I'll go through next. We did create this hopefully streamlined, easy to follow criteria table, and then the associated review standards are hopefully easy to follow as well. So kind of walking through this table, it's broken into three portions. We have undeveloped natural, kind of on the left side. In the middle, we have both undeveloped and developed criteria, and then on the right side, we had developed. So in communications with building safety and also with engineering, projects involving less than 50 cubic yards of disturbance in disturbed areas would be exempt hillside development permit. And these would be typically reviewed at a ministerial level. That means a plan check type of process through what's called a fine grading and drainage type of review. The lower portion of this table here describes what developed classifications could be. So evidence along those lines could include prior grading permits, building permits, certificate of occupancies, and similar records. So we'd use that evidence to see if a customer is saying, oh no, my property's been developed, here's my record on that in the past. There's no permit history, which could happen here. It would be then referred to the director for determination with aerial photography. If there's a disagreement from there, then we would elevate it to the Planning Commission for a final determination. And this kind of follows the same process with some of our other permits at a director's level determination. The lower criteria here describes when a grading permit would be required. And then the final part of this table, I'll just go through here. The upper row describes what qualifies for fine grading and drainage review. This refers back to the city's grading standards, which are in Chapter 15. It's a little bit technical, I won't get into all that. The middle portion speaks to ADUs and accessory structures. And just to note, if a proposed structure is 1,000 square feet and over, it does require a development plan permit citywide. In this case, if you're in a hillside area, a development plan permit is the same thing as a hillside development permit. So we just wanted to make sure that criteria was the same there. So also what has changed since 2023, it was determined by the council that the retaining wall regulation should be a separate project. There's a lot of numerous variables associated with retaining walls citywide. However, the council did just direct staff to proceed with the proposed retaining wall updates as they relate specifically to hillside areas. The updated standards are intended to balance flexibility through clearly defined design options while maintaining sufficient specificity, particularly regarding retaining wall designs. So we do have a new retaining wall table for people to follow. Hopefully this is a streamlined process. The first criteria here, this is mainly carryover from what's in the code currently today. It just talks about front setbacks, line of sight criteria, and then up to a 6-foot threshold. So what's new here is we did add a new section here with over 6 feet. So if someone needs to go over 6 feet in a hillside area, which is a likely scenario, there is a waiver modification process that we're building in here. This mirrors what we have for a regular freestanding wall on a citywide basis. So again, it would go to the director, and then they'd have to show some findings on why it's needed, and there couldn't be a health and safety issue, obviously. And the rest of this is just mainly carryover criteria. On your screen here are just some examples of different types of retaining walls. The council wanted to have images in the code that spoke to the public on what they could do. These are just different options, I should say. They're not mandates, they're just different options for someone to select from. And then also we did updated graphics throughout the code as well, leveraging AI technology for that. And then with that, in closing, staff recommends the following actions. Find that the proposed actions consistent with Public Resource Code Section 21000. This is pursuant to Section 15162 of CEQA. Second, receive public comments. And third, adopt a resolution, Attachment 1, recommending that the City Council introduce and place on a first reading an ordinance for the Title 16 updates reflective of Attachment 2A and Attachment 3, Exhibit B. And as noted here on the screen as part of the recommendation. And I also would like to read into the record, the hillside overlay exhibit had the old map on there. I have provided you the new map, so I just want to read into the record the ordinance should be reflective of that moving forward. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and we do have engineering staff here to also answer questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. At this time, I'll open it up to my colleagues for questions. I'll start with Mr. Rose. Commissioner Rose, would you like to start?
Is this a new requirement, a change? So if someone wants to build a 30-foot retaining wall, this would apply, but if it was built before, this doesn't apply now?
So we currently have we do have retaining wall standards currently in our hillside areas of the city. It's limited to 6 feet in height. So we needed to have an off-ramp for someone to build, if they wanted to go higher in those areas, you can do this provided you have, some of these designs. That's what the council wanted. And there's a process to be reviewed by the director. This this is the same process that we have for freestanding walls if someone needs to deviate and go higher. So we just mirrored that same sort of thing. And as long as there's no public health and safety issues, that's kind of where we landed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Boychuk.
So, Chris, on the new map, the orange areas are considered hillside, and
Yeah.
which is what we're addressing tonight. So the rest of the city, are you guys going to come back later with different standards for that, or how's that going to work?
The only thing that the council wants to deal with on a citywide basis from the feedback from this workshop process has been dealing with retaining walls on a citywide basis. But that in itself is a bigger project. So we're not going to be dealing with that right now. On this map, it was suggested by the public, hey, we need to have specific plans also noted in here on this. So if someone lives in one of those specific plan communities, say Greer Ranch or Copper Canyon, there's hillside criteria in those specific plans already baked in. So it's its own zoning code essentially in those areas.
And when applicants come with a new specific plan, we're going to need to update the map every time.
And then I think there was a reference that the wall has to be earth tones. Is there a condition on what type of block to be used? Or does
It's just different design options. It's supposed to, right now, the code actually speaks to it blending in kind of with the surrounding environment. We did provide different options for someone to select from. That was the direction of council. They wanted to provide flexibility, but also provide some guidance. So it's kind of that balance.
Okay, thank you.
You alluded that council wants to look at different wall standards or maintenance, or what was the other part of the thing that we're not adopting tonight, that what their goals are that came up?
Mainly on the retaining wall criteria, they wanted to sidelight that as a separate project because it was kind of a bigger topic citywide. For example, in our business park area, we might have something that might be different than a residential area or in a commercial area. So it's kind of a bigger project in itself. So that was kind of the main thing. Really, the other stuff was just a lot of carryover from before. The developed versus undeveloped is new. That came up as part of the workshop process with public input. They felt that it was important that we define kind of how that worked in hillside areas. So, we created this table. Hopefully it's easy for someone to follow on where they would land and what bucket.
Okay, so I'm going to go back in time. When I look at the, again, it's always bothered me. We get off the Interstate 15 freeway at Murrieta Hot Springs and we look at this big wall, this big monstrosity that that probably would have been part of the hillside had it been applied at the time, but we got this big, essentially an ugly wall. And it has foliage that is starting to grow. But is there anything in this proposed change that would make any requirement to keep that wall maintained? Meaning, they can't just shut off the water and the plants stop growing on that wall.
They're supposed to be maintaining their property on.
Supposed to be. That's my point. Is there anything in the
fire reasons and things of that nature? We do have an example for someone if they want to put vines. It's not on. I don't have the image on here, but that's another option with like a keystone wall. They might have vines that are growing in between, like rosemary or something.
No, I totally get it.
So Chairman, that project has conditions that require them to maintain the landscaping on that property, and that goes with typical developments that we have in the city that have development plans, that they have to maintain the landscaping.
But there is no ordinance. So if they build the wall, they put whatever on it, and they have to maintain it. It's project by project as opposed to an overall municipal code that could be part of this ordinance. This ordinance doesn't address it, is what I'm saying.
Chairman, I love the idea is what you're not seeing in front of you is conditions of approval. And
right.
Every time we have a project, we apply conditions of approval that prior to grading, And then post is ongoing conditions of approval. So you shall maintain the colors, the design, the fencing, the painting, the irrigation, the wall colors. All of that is put in there as a condition of approval. I don't think we'd see that language here in this type of presentation and report, but maybe that's something we need to take forward with the city council to show them an example of how our typical projects are conditioned so that we can address these should an HOA or should an individual property owner not maintain their property in the fashion that we expected it.
And the only reason I bring it up is I think at a prior meeting, I think I'd asked you, hey, are they required? And at the time, you didn't know if there was a requirement in that particular project had that. So now you're saying that there is, which I'm glad, and I've seen them plant some plants there. Where I'm going with this is putting in the landscaped wall, if you will, and then there's no maintenance of it. We can have this standard, but if we give people the option to basically choose different types of blocks and a living wall, so to speak, and then there's nothing to basically back it up and maintain it, then that we've only done half the job. You see what I'm saying?
And Chair, what council wants staff to bring back was preempted by that wall. That was a shock value for the whole community.
Yes.
To this day. The beneficial news is that we have a bond that is required so that if they don't finish that wall in the first 3 to 5 years, then there are other things that the city can do. We have been spending a lot of time with the terraces on how they're going to do a better job on that wall. It is going to be a green screen, but lessons learned. City Council does not ever want that to happen again. And so part of what I think we'll come back with in that separate attempt is more space in front of the wall so they can accommodate larger plantings of trees and landscaping. I don't think we're going to rely upon the green screen. I think we're going to have a multitude approach through landscaping on how to do a better job on screening these elements. But you're spot on. I do like those comments, and it's very important to the city that we have a strong aesthetic value.
And also looking it was the February 13th city council meeting in the workshop there. You mentioned developed and undeveloped, but in those notes actually had disturbed and undisturbed. What's the difference there? And is that clarified in this ordinance? What is disturbed versus undisturbed?
I think we just went to developed versus undeveloped. I mean, it kind of means it's a similar definition, I guess.
I guess my point is if we want clarity with this, because here's my experience, and of course, I've been here for over 30 years, but what happens is we basically pass an ordinance, or we set a condition. And then years later, people that deal with this, they go on, they retire, they move on. Somebody else comes in now, acquires the property, and then it's been left to interpretation by the staff that's there. Well, geez, what did they mean at the time? This really wasn't addressed. So the lack of clarity causes ambiguity somewhere down the line, 5 years, 10 years down the road. So I'm just going by what I read in what the council had was disturbed or undisturbed, or it said undisturbed, it didn't say disturbed. But this only addressed developed or undeveloped.
When I read this, and that's a good point, when I read this, a property owner that presents themselves to develop a little bit more of their property, the origin of that property might have been when we were the county of Riverside, right? And so what we'll be asking them is to demonstrate how that was legally disturbed. Typically, that would have been through a grading plan permit, either through the county or the city. We do have the benefit of Google and near maps and other things that we can look back in time. I think we're not going to try to be punitive with homeowners. We're just going to try to get down to how do we develop the right part of the project, and how do we make sure that there wasn't something unpermitted. What I mean by that is Was there a wetland? Was there some sensitive habitat? Was there something where if they had come in for a permit, we would have asked more questions about that? But I think it can be difficult sometimes for applicants to find old records. I think that's going to be the nuance with some folks. Definitely, we're going to work closely with mom and pops and other folks to develop their properties. But what I see is that it's either an area that was never touched, it's habitat, or ungraded. Other than that, we'll look for some history of how that was legally cleared. Now, even in a property, you can have 100-foot fire clearing around your property. You can clear the vegetation. So there's some things that don't need permit history. Those are things that are just matter of law. But maybe we need to condense the verbiage so it's more consistent with what you outlined.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of defined what you think, which is a good definition, what you think is difference between disturbed and undisturbed. My point is 5 years, 10 years down the road, somebody has a different definition, unless it's codified in this ordinance, then it's up to, then we're right back to square one where why we're doing this in the first place is because of different versions of interpretation on things. So I think the best that we can kind of lock it down is what I'm thinking.
I think for the disturbed or developed classification, where we land on that is, do we have grading permits for the site? Do we have building permits? Is there a certificate of occupancy? Is there records along those lines for that show an area of the site? Oh, okay, this was already approved for a grading. This is the parameters of that. You know, when someone comes in for a fine grading permit, they'll have a site exhibit or a grading permit. They'll be going through Rick's review with a grading plan permit. We'll have plans on file that will show the limits of that disturbance typically. That's, you know, and if we don't have that evidence, the alternative is we have you can get historic aerials, and that would be presented to the director to make a determination if, you know, what was there at that point in time? Does it appear to be, you know, disturbed in a functional manner? So that's kind of where the delta is.
Again, that's kind of a lot of work to try and go back and try and research and try and determine as if something it's either clearly defined.
The problem is the county has really bad records that we've inherited. So we're going to have this kind of review process. It's not perfect, but we're trying to throw criteria in there that would be used for evidence.
Okay, and then last question before we go on to the public hearing here. This map, is this our first official version of the map for the Hillside ordinance that, or has it been changed over time?
Yes, so it would be codified in chapter 1624.100. So this will be the first time we have it actually in our municipal code. In the past, it's been kind of referenced as something on file with the department. That's what led to a lot of confusion in the past on what that record looked like.
And has that map changed over time, you know, just at the staff level or just based on what we've kind of determined in-house? Have we done in-house modifications to the map, or has there been some official, hey, this is the map, and but it's never gone in front of a governing board to actually adopt?
No, it hasn't changed officially. The major change has been the addition of the specific plans back into the map exhibit with that disclaimer. That was suggested through the workshop process. So that's what's before you for consideration.
So we've had the general plan, but no overlay.
We've had no overlay, and that's led to confusion on applicability and where the hillside areas of the city are and where they're not.
Which is why we're here. Okay. With that, any other questions of staff? Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to the public hearing. Public hearing starting at 7:55. With that, Madam Secretary, do we have any speakers? I think I saw a few in queue here.
Yes, we have Cass and Klein.
Mr. Klein, please come forward.
First of all, I cannot acknowledge and compliment staff enough over the course of the past 5 years and what staff has done, and particularly Christopher. I don't want to burn too much of my time, but I can't express to you and the public enough appreciation for what staff has done. Before I get into what I've presented for you, and how we got here was a project that I was brought on board with. It got into litigation after it was approved by Planning Commission. It was appealed to City Council, which is how we, the city, discovered this situation. And so one of the things that I would absolutely like to see is on the 25% that we add decimal point 000, because in the course of that potential litigation, one of the questions that we asked Bob Mailing was, what is the best practice in engineering when it's, say, 24.51%? Do you round up or not? And he didn't have an answer. And so that, from our council's perspective, created some question. And so to make it abundantly clear in the code, I think that we need to go ahead and say that it's 25.000, and maybe even go to the extent of if it's below that, we don't round up. Something else, I think that the map needs to be adopted into the general plan like our land use map is. When I do due diligence for projects, the first thing I do is I go to the land use map and then I go to the code. So this way we can ensure that we're not missing it. Whoever's doing due diligence can cross-reference those things. Now let me get into this. The staff report talks about establish more objective and internally consistent development standards, improve administrative consistency and project predictability, and then I have highlighted in the executive summary. We're often criticized being subjective and inconsistent, and that is very accurate. That's part of the reason why we're here. And that brings me to the point where page 14 of the ordinance, you see that I've highlighted C, D, and E and G and underlined, talking about the word encourage, which is not objective, that is subjective. And I can tell you from experience, and Chair, following up on the comments you just made about who is here in 5 years, I would even say I have found in my experience, depending on, and not just in this jurisdiction, in every jurisdiction, depending on which planner I'm dealing with, that subjectivity or that encouragement may vary. So if I may continue.
You may. I'll give you another minute.
Thank you. And the reason why I wrote this down for you all to consider is I knew I would run out of time, but to me, look, this is comprehensive, it's convoluted, but I wanted to focus on this because, and I believe staff is trying to do that, right? We're trying to be as objective as possible, but when we use these words, encourage, and what my memo says has been my real life experience, right? It becomes a process, paralyzation. You end up having multiple meetings. You end up having a director's hearing, where if we take these things out some way and make it more objective, that needs to be done. So thank you for the additional time. I appreciate it. And again, Christopher and staff, I can't, look, as often as I have come up here and passionately criticized, it's equal with my compliments to staff tonight. And I really want to, I think I've made that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, they've been working on this for years and working very hard. We appreciate it. Okay, next speaker, Mr. Long.
Alan Long.
Is he in the queue?
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. I echo what Casson said, and I won't go on and on to waste my time, but I appreciate staff's efforts. None of what I say is directed at them. I will respectfully disagree with one statement because I think it's very misleading, is that the code and the general plan wasn't meant to be citywide and it wasn't meant to apply to certain parts of the city. That's inaccurate. The general plan references it. The previous code says it's throughout the city. That code was adopted by previous council, so therefore they also thought it was throughout the city. There's been potential litigation because it was and wasn't applied throughout the city. It was absolutely a code that applied to the throughout the city, which brings me to my point of equitability here. You're taking everybody out of this. You're creating this map and asking to codify it to apply this code now to a very select group of individuals, which I'm a part of. All I've asked for from day one is equitability. I want to be like everybody else. If the code applies to everybody else, then so be it, I'll be in it. If not, and I'm disturbed because I've heard from you, I've heard from council that they don't want to prevent anybody from building. They've agreed that my property's been disturbed, so therefore this shouldn't apply in the same way. But yet it does and is. One of the things, if you play this out, if you look at what's being presented to you, they have classified disturbed and undisturbed areas, and they say essentially if you have a permit or you can prove that your land has been disturbed, it doesn't apply. Well, that has some inherent issues in of itself, because back in the 1950s, the Los Alamos Hills area was an agricultural area. It's stated in our general plan and the history, and you didn't need an ag grading permit to grade on top of some of those hilltops that had avocado groves. I've tried to find past permits in the county, at the county building, and anything past 1980, it's a needle in a haystack. You're not going to find it in the basement. If you play this out, say I do have a permit. The way this is written, it says, okay, your permitted area is called developed, disturbed, and this doesn't apply. But other parts of your property, it might apply if you don't have proof of a permit. But let's just say, for the sake of the matter, I do have proof, and I say, I want to build an ADU or a building or something on the other part of my property, and it's been disturbed, here's my permit. They said, good, it doesn't apply until you move 50 cubic yards of dirt. Then the hillside grading ordinance applies. That's what this says. I can't even build a BMX track in 50 cubic yards of dirt. So essentially it applies to me. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah, I'll allow you extra time, just like I did Mr. Klein.
Thank you, sir. I have been on that side of the dais. I've been on that side of the counter as a city employee. I've been a lifelong resident here who's built my own home, and a business owner that started it from scratch right here in Murrieta. And I can say, without equivocation, unless you provide more clarity, I'm going to be up here, or my kids are going to be up here, or my grandkids are going to be up here defending and trying to justify being able to build on their property because this is ambiguous. For the very same reason the staff said they needed a map. I need a map that says I'm disturbed. Shade me a different color. Say I'm disturbed in the map. That's clarity. They can look at the map and say, this is the disturbed land. I offered a simple solution the first time I spoke here. I've gone to every single meeting. This has been going on since 2022, missed one meeting. I've been to every single one, pleaded, gave my input. If you need a map, so do we. My solution was take us out of the map. That was a simple solution. MSHCP solved most of the preservation of land we're talking about anyway. This is a very, very few people it applies to. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Secretary, do we have any more speakers?
Seeing none.
Okay. None? Closes the,
Chair.
oh, okay.
I'm sorry. We have Dan Long.
Good evening.
Good
I'd like
evening, sir.
to echo what my previous commenters mentioned. Staff has done a fantastic job. I've also been on the other side of the desk here, and I know this is not an easy task. I've worked for numerous jurisdictions as a city planner. as well as a private developer and landowner myself, and I know the hillside gradient is always a very challenging task to bring on. I brought you some pictures there. I had no idea that was going to come up today. I apologize. I took those today, as well as some of those from Google Earth. I'll speak to that in just a moment. We'll circle back around to that. I think staff has done a very good job on the height standards. I think we can check that box. That's been solved. I think they've done a very good job of adding clarity to that. We have some cleanup items in the ordinance. I think the staff's done a very good job on that. One of the items I do have some heartache with is the GIS model. I even heard a reference to AI today. Everyone wants to talk about AI. It's going to solve all the world's problems, but I've dealt with AI, and I'm telling you right now, it's garbage in, garbage out. Same thing with GIS. I have 4.6 acres that I personally own that's inside that hillside area that's highlighted as orange. And about 1 acre of that is dead flat, but yet it's highlighted as orange that I applied to. I would love to build on that flat acre, but here's the problem. I'm on septic, and it doesn't perk there. Where it does perk is where it's a hilly area. So there's some real challenges with this map and how you actually apply it. You can say, oh, you're in the hillside area, build in the flat area. Well, okay, now I'm gonna have to build a pump for my septic system. It becomes really challenging with how you apply the regulations when you really start drilling down into the details here. So I'd really like to encourage there's some kind of appeal process for a record of survey to prove that you're not within this sloped area. I think there's solutions that we can do to that to give some flexibility to staff to say, you know what, you can go ahead and build in that area because you're not technically in a sloped area. So I'd like to see that added in there. We mentioned some of the exemptions, as the previous speaker mentioned. I agree with that completely. I would like to go on the record on some of these parcels. My property, 28640 Callahan Road, APN 900-060-010, is developed with a single-family home that was done in 1980, predates the city. That is a disturbed lot. 37250 Mason Road, 900-060-026, also built with a single-family home well ahead of the city and corporation. I'll let my brother speak to his house. It's at 37210 in Mason, also built with a single-family home that has been disturbed. My neighbor, address 28701 Los Alamos Heights Road, 5 separate APNs, 900-060-009, 057, 058, 056, and 054. If I may continue.
Yeah, I'll give you another minute, just like I did the other speakers.
Those 5 parcels are all disturbed with a single-family home, water wells, water tanks, agricultural roads, and numerous other outcropping buildings that are built well ahead of city incorporation dating back to the 1960s. You're not going to find those permits, but I'm telling you right now, for the record, those lots are developed and disturbed, and I'd like to see if those are exempt from the standards of the hillside grading ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Secretary, any other speakers before we close the public hearing? Okay.
Seeing none.
All right. 8:09 PM, close the public hearing. Questions for staff, any of my colleagues here, based upon what we've heard? Or staff, would you like to respond?
I'd be interested to hear what staff has to say.
Yeah, so on the 25, so if you're under 25%, those flatter areas that they mentioned, it's not in the hillside area. You're just in an area for review, essentially. So if you got a flatter area of the site, it's 15% or whatever. It's not a hillside.
Yeah, so between 25 and 50, but I think.
It's 25 and 50 and 15 over.
There was mention about an appeal process. I believe there's already one in place, correct? Because it would come to staff, then to the commission, and ultimately to the council if there's a disagreement about interpretation or what have you. Is that inaccurate?
Yeah, so that speaks to, the undeveloped, developed process, that table we just kind of went through.
Yeah.
So if your site, and the reason is there's varying topography through a site, right? You might have flat areas, you're gonna have some steeper areas. So really, the hillside area applies to those steeper areas, 25% and greater. And say if someone wants to come in and they want to grade some of that, that's kind of where this would apply. If the flat areas wouldn't really apply,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. The other question, or more of a statement, there was this comment about the word encourage. And my interpretation is that word is in the purpose
Yes.
of the ordinance. And whenever, I mean, as an attorney, whenever I'm writing something, when you say purpose, it's, you use words like that, and then the actual
Right.
ordinance says, this is the nuts and bolts. This is where, yes, it shall occur. Am I misreading how you were using that?
It's a preamble. It's currently in the code today.
It's like precatory language.
Right.
Okay, that's what I
It's just
thought.
it's-
Okay.
We could work with the city attorney to refine that further if needed.
I just see it all the time. It's always, this is our desire. That's why you put the purpose in. And then this is the result of our purpose, which is the actual ordinance. Okay.
Yeah, and not to split hairs, but I think the point is good that the state law is telling us that if we don't have objective language, we don't have it. So I think that was the point, was we want to make sure that as we're talking about something, there's a checkbox routine. Like, what happens if someone can't find a record from 1955 in the county? What do we do? I think those are good comments for us to focus on.
I just wanted to add one thing too. We can't really exempt individual properties here. We haven't even adopted an ordinance yet, right? So got to get there first. We got to get to the council, get an ordinance adopted, and then people can submit projects and we can start figuring out which ones are developed and which ones are not developed, right? But we can't do that yet. We got to get through the ordinance first.
And from what I heard, the council does want to address the rest of the city, but that's coming later.
Just for retaining wall updates.
Retaining walls, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a separate project.
Yeah, not for the hillside. It only applies according to what's on the map is what you're saying. It's only on the map.
And it's a drill down to the 25% areas on those, within that map, because there is going to be undulation throughout a site. Not an entire site will be all 25%. You'll have variables.
And the map is citywide. The map applies citywide. So it would be codified in the development code, but applies citywide.
Because there's a table, so on page 285 of the ordinance, there's a table that explains what is a hillside and what is not. So
And the map goes further. Not only is it citywide, it goes into our sphere of influence. We have an area in that.
Okay, some of the other concerns here that were brought up here about putting the map in the general plan. What are your thoughts about that?
I can take that one, Chair. I don't think that's a good idea. This is, the standards for the hillside area are within the development code. They're expressly as what Chris has drafted, and the tables are in the development code. It doesn't really belong in the general plan. It belongs in the development code. So that would be staff's opinion on that.
Okay. Again, we've gone back and forth versus developed, undeveloped, disturbed, and undisturbed. I'm just going by what the council's direction was in the very last workshop, was to define that term. And so I'm struggling at that because I don't think that we've defined that term to provide more clarity. And their direction is basically to us, all of us, is to have clarity, so that way we're not left to interpret things either now or at a later time.
essentially the table has that, but we can add another definition to clarify that further.
Well, that's where I'm going. I think it probably needs more work in order to have that clearly defined.
We can add that too.
Any other concerns or questions?
Chair, there was one comment by one of our speakers about a percentage, 25%, 0.000. A similar comment was made by Mayor Pro Tem Holliday. He wanted to make sure it was exact, that it was 25 and nothing else. And I think the rounding up comment that we heard, that's a good one. I think that's consistent with the chair, that he didn't want there to be inconsistencies on the approach. So we'll make sure as part of the recommendation today, we follow up on that, make sure that's crystal clear to the city council.
By adding in 0.000?
Well, I was told just keep it 25. But if it's 25 or 25.000, I think it's the same thing. We just want a floor.
See, the lack of clarity, this is exactly my point.
Yeah.
Is 25 to you versus 25.000 could mean the same, but then it could be different. And so,
Chair, there is no other place in our code that stretches out decimal places like that, and there's really an infinite number of decimal places you can do. I think what Director here is trying to convey is that if we add the additional language that was suggested also by Mr. Klein,